Hello and welcome back to the notes. It's that time of year again when we pay a visit to Hindsight Capital, the imaginary hedge fund that has the ability to invest for the year with the advantage of perfect hindsight. Now, this year, Hindsight Capital has moved its headquarters here to Buenos Aires, capital of Argentina. Now, why are we in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina? Because Hindsight Capital always wants to denominate its returns in the weakest currency out there. That will automatically make any other return look better. And this year they could see that Argentina, which entered the year immediately after a devaluation, was going to need to devalue further. It was the weakest major currency. If it bought the neighboring Brazilian real, Brazil entered the year in the middle of a political crisis. It was a classic candidate to rebound, and as you can see, the Brazilian real hugely outpaced the Argentine peso. That was why they chose to base themselves here in Argentina. Now, the first trade they put on involved Argentina's neighbor and rival, Brazil. It started the year in intense political crisis, intense economic crisis, and so, of course, they could tell it was the perfect time to buy. Brazilian stocks went through the roof, as did the real. Denominate that in dollars, and it did fantastically. To juice that up a little more, they compared that to Chinese stocks, which had the worst year of any major market. If you short the Shanghai Composite and put all the money into Brazilian stocks, this is what you would have achieved. Hindsight Capital did extremely well out of spotting the difference between two countries that used to get lumped together as BRICS. Now, the next trade might be a very surprising one for you. They sold volatility. They went short the VIX index, the fear index, which measures how much people are prepared to pay to guard against future volatility, and put all the money into American stocks, into the S&P 500. That means that as people get calmer and as the stock market goes up, you get juiced extra returns. And as you can see, it works beautifully, even though you would have thought this would be a year when we saw Brexit, when we saw the arrival of President Donald Trump, when we saw all the horrors of Aleppo, that there would have been a lot of volatility. In fact, volatility kept falling. You might call it irrational equanimity, but it made you money. Now, the next trade involves coal. Hindsight Capital could see that by the end of last year, with the Paris conference, the excitement about cutting out carbon fuels had gone too far. And they were right. They bought the global coal index and sold short the clean energy index, and again made out like gangbusters. If stuff starts out cheap enough, you can still make a lot of money, even if people are completely disenamored with it. Next, a very big, very interesting trade for them was to bet on the shares of US banks while betting against the shares of European banks. They could see, again, that European banks still hadn't dealt with the legacy of the crisis. You saw that with crisis conditions around Deutsche Bank and around Italian banks this year. Meanwhile, US banks were in a much cleaner position and ready to flourish under President-elect Trump. And as you can see, they made a lot of money from that trade.
Yes, we were visited by one Barack Obama, one of the oldest functioning democracies in the world, and here he was telling us to vote Remain.
Now, finally, Hindsight Capital could see one of the big shocks of the year coming, which was the British vote for Brexit. Obviously, this would be bad for the pound. They decided they would bet on Bitcoin, the digital currency. It's a wild currency, a wild ride. It was ready to rise. And as you can see, if you took your pounds and bought Bitcoins with them, you would have more than doubled your money during this year of Brexit. Meanwhile, Hindsight could work out very clearly indeed that Brexit, whatever people said, was not going to be good for British assets. This is what British stocks did for the year, and this is what the rest of the world did when denominated in sterling. Hindsight was on the right side of that trade. Now, one very interesting thing that happened with Brexit was it came in mid-year and in many, many ways signalled a critical turning point for world markets. In the next instalment, we'll show you how Hindsight Capital made a lot of money out of the turning point in mid-year.